Thank you. Good morning. Well, thank you for inviting me to speak. Today, I should just make clear I'm speaking in my capacity as Director of the Migration Observatory at Oxford University, not on behalf of the Migration Advisory Committee. And I will use my 10 minutes to make 3 points. The first one is going to be about numbers and net migration, specifically the role of student migration in reaching the net migration target. The second point will be about public opinion and students, and the third one will be about impacts. Students and the net migration target. Now, I'm explaining this without expressing a view of whether or not it's a good idea to have the target, but I think it's very important for the debate to understand some of the basic arithmetic and mechanics of the target. So one thing to be clear about is that net migration currently runs at 250,000. The great bulk of this is made up of net migration from outside Europe. That's the graph in red at the top. Net migration of British people has been negative for a long time, more British people leaving than coming, and has been roughly offset over the past few years by positive net migration of other EU nationals. So if you add up British and other EU nationals, net migration has hovered around zero. Now, there's no reason why this needs to be the case forever. Actually, in recent years, we have seen an upward trend, but the basic point is that net migration is primarily about net migration from outside Europe. Now, we've got a target of 100,000, net migration running in 250,000. That means that non-EU net migration, which the government can control, needs to be reduced by 150,000. That's equivalent to a decrease in non-EU net migration by 2/3. That's what would be required. The next question to ask is, how do you distribute cuts across different groups, students, workers, and family? Fact is, we have very bad data on the emigration of students. That's why this calculation is usually based on looking at share of the different groups and inflows. Now, if you look at non-EU immigration, 60% of it is made up of students, 20% workers, 20% family. So if you apply these percentages to the cuts that are required, you see that student migration, net migration of students would have to be reduced by 90,000, and net migration of work and family would have to be reduced by 30,000 each. That's a typo here on the family. So the basic point here is that if you're serious about the net migration target, it is clear that it cannot be reached without making very significant cuts to student net migration. The second point that I'd like to make is, and this is based on a commentary that the Migration Observatory published just half an hour ago, a second challenge in reducing net migration in a sustainable way is that there's an important difference between short-term effects and long-term effects. And the basic logic here is that if you want to reduce net migration in a sustainable way, you've got to reduce the inflow of people who would stay in the UK. If you've got an inflow of people who come and leave, you will have an initial reduction in net migration because inflows go down, but further, a few years down the line, emigration is going to go down, and you will end up where you were before. So the best example probably is intercompany transfers. We heard a lot about intercompany transfers after the publication of the MAC report yesterday. Intercompany transfers do not have the right to settlement. So reducing the inflow of intercompany transfers will not, in the long run, affect net migration rate. What this chart shows you is a comparison of reducing inflows in red and the bounce back effect of net migration because of lower emigration further down the line. So you see here, if you reduce immigration by 150,000, over time, you will have reduced net migration by only about 50,000. So there's a big bounce back effect over time because of lower immigration. So the fundamental challenge here is that any reduction in immigration will be partially reversed over time. The second point I'd like to make about this is that the magnitude of the bounce back effect depends on settlement rates. So the lower the settlement rates of specific routes, the larger the bounce back effect. So that's the particular challenge with students. On the one hand, we know that they're the biggest category in net migration, so you have to reduce students in a big way to reach the target. At the same time, we also know that of all the groups, family workers, students are the least likely to settle. So whatever reduction you make in inflows of students, the bounce back effect is going to be largest among these three groups. Again, I think that's an interesting aspect of the net migration debate that's been often overlooked. My second point is on public opinion. We all know that for a long time, the British public has expressed the view that there's too many migrants in the UK. A colleague who compiled this chart for me asked me to point out that there are three different data sources here. So this chart doesn't necessarily mean that public opposition has gone down. But anyway, we're about 60% say that they want fewer migrants. The Migration Observatory has done some work to find out two things. First of all, who do the public have in mind when they think about immigrants? And secondly, of the people who are saying they want fewer immigrants, who specifically do they want fewer of? Now, the first slide tells you who the public has in mind when they think about immigrants. Interestingly, the biggest category are asylum seekers, followed by workers. Only 30% of the public think of people who come here to study as immigrants. What's interesting about this is that it's almost in total contrast to actual inflows. So 60% of the public think asylum seekers. Well, asylum seekers only constitute 4% of all migration inflows in the UK in 2009. Students, on the other hand, as we've heard today, constitute a very large share of migration flows, but very few people think of them as immigrants. In response to the question of if you want fewer migrants, who do you want fewer of, we received these answers. The point for this debate today is that university students, further education college students, and even English language students are not among the types of migrants that the public want fewer of, but 30% want fewer of these. On the other hand, the public wants fewer low-skilled workers. The dilemma here is that most low-skilled immigration is from within Europe, which the government cannot control. And the public also wants fewer asylum seekers. The dilemma here is that they're so small numerically that it's not going to have much impact on net migration. We also asked specifically about different categories of work. Scientists, researchers, not surprisingly, again, come out as a type of immigration flow that the public is not particularly bothered about reducing. So in a way, that creates a public opinion dilemma for policy, if you so will. While there is widespread agreement for the government's top-line objective of reducing immigration, there isn't support for some of the specific channels that are being actually reduced, because that's what the government can target. And finally, on impacts, and I don't have any particular insights on the impacts of students, primarily because I think, in contrast to some of the other debates that we've had around work and family, for students there really hasn't been any systematic research impact study. Students has been one of the fields where the Migration Advisory has not worked on intensively. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there are potential benefits and potential costs. And just like increasing immigration doesn't always create benefits for everybody, reducing immigration doesn't always create costs for everybody. So I think we really need to do the work. Potential benefits, as we've heard this morning, undoubtedly there's a big contribution in terms of fees, and fees from non-EU students partly cross-subsidize home students. The interesting aspect here is that home students, of course, include British and other EU students, so there's an interesting question to be asked about who they're really cross-subsidizing. We've heard about the student sectors being a big export industry. There's impacts on employment and innovation. And as we've heard, there are potential benefits from UK-trained students returning home. Now, the potential costs, the politically most salient issue, of course, is the potential displacement of British workers in the labor market. Again, the work hasn't been done yet, so we can't say anything about the extent to which that is happening or not. We've also heard about illegal employment and abuse and potential knock-on effects. And we've heard a lot about pressure on public services infrastructure. Again, the extent to which students make demands on public service infrastructure, to the extent to which these demands are different from other migrants is a very important question that, in my view, needs to be looked at. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.